Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This video is all about pruning ground covers or controlling ground cover plants. We're going to talk about lots of them, but we'll probably miss something you perhaps have in your garden. And if you do and we don't talk about it, you can ask questions down below. And if I know the answer, I'll try to answer it. We're going to jump right in with this Brigadoon St. John's wort. This one is not really that aggressive in the garden, but a lot of the things we talk about in this video can be very aggressive in the garden, and probably I wouldn't recommend you actually using them. We'll talk about that as we go. This one has done a good job of covering underneath a couple other woody shrubs, doing a great job of covering the ground. This is a very low growing St. John's wort, has really attractive yellow flowers on it that the pollinators absolutely love. It can come through the winter looking pretty good, or it can come through the winter looking a little bit rough like this does. This is one that you can cut down with a lawnmower, and a lot of these that we're going to talk about could be done with a lawnmower set on a high setting with a sharp blade. It's been raining like crazy, and I just don't, I think it's going to make more of a mess of it than anything else. And so I'm just going to go through here with some head shears to clean it up. And then I can get some of the leaves out of the bottom of it. We're about to mulch, but this is one that gets a rejuvenation pruning every winter, and it will actually increase the number of flowers. The new growth on it is much more gold than the old growth. Even if it still looked pretty good coming out of winter, that new foliage would be brighter. So we just cut this one basically to the ground, again, by late April, early May, it'll just look absolutely fantastic. But again, this is, not much to this. I'm just going to leave it a couple inches above the ground. Any of these ground covers we're talking about, if they've stretched out further than you want to keep them, this will be the time while the ground is a little softer to get them completely dug out. You can, if it's gone further out here than you want, I can almost, if you look at this, I can almost pull this up by hand and then cut the roots on it right there. And I've got some pieces with some roots on them right there. If there was a dead spot in the middle, I could go replant it in the middle, put it in a container, give it to a friend, throw it on the compost pile, whatever you want to do. But this is the time of year to put it back where you want it, because it's, again, these are ground covers. They want to creep out, and then of course rejuvenate them at the same time. So after I cut in there for a minute, I'll come in here with the rake and just see. This will allow me to see what I've missed. I can kind of stand it back up. You'll have to do this typically at least once. Go through there, and now I can see what's still sticking up here that needs to be cut. I could get very specific and come down here and look at a bud along a stem and cut right to it. This stuff comes back so fast, and almost everything we're going to show you comes back fast enough that you don't need to worry about it. All right, I think that's pretty much it. I got this cleaned up. I can come back in here, plant some in any kind of thin spot to fill it back in. I'm just going to edge the grass here, mulch along the front, maybe mulch in a couple bare spots in there in the next week or two, and it'll just come back out like crazy. We have a couple different ground cover sedums planted under a windmill palm, and with these there's not really anything to cut down. They're basically, grows pretty much flat to the ground. My ground cover sedum is just getting control on the width of it, because it can be a bully in the garden, and it can run up under anything that it kind of wants to run up under. And so, like back here where this blue spruce is, I don't want it running completely up under it. And so I'll just take a shovel with this one and just do this. And I'll just kind of cut it back to the basic shape that I want to keep it, and then come through here and just, take it out just like that. I've got a bulb coming up in it right there. So, but I'll just take it up just like this. And it can be, again, this one could go into a container, be a good filler in a container, or something that will come down over the edge of a container during the summer. It can be disposed of, given to a neighbor, replanted back into a thinner space. that got thin during the winter for whatever reason. But again, I just want to carefully as I can, get it out. Most of the roots are on the surface. I'm not going to get 100% of it, but I'm going to come back in wherever I cut this back to, whatever circle that I want to cut it back to, I'll, if this is it right here, if I'm coming around, just kind of cutting it back to that edge, and then I'll just treat this as if it's like a turf edge, and I'll mulch around the back of it, and that'll slow it down a bit. This is one you're gonna have to do a few times during the summertime. It's not a once and done kind of thing, but here in the late winter, great time to do it. And then again, during the summer, I'll have to cut it back a bit, but I can keep it in this basic shape pretty easy using this flat shovel. We use this creeping Jenny at the bottom of our bird feeder. It works really great for keeping it tidy down here where all this bird seed's dropping on the ground. In further north, it will completely die back to the ground. You probably wouldn't be seeing it right now in February. You probably have to wait a little while longer and see where it's coming back up from. These can go to sleep in one size and wake up much, much larger. And so this is another one just like the Sedum that I'll go through, and I'll just basically cut a line, where I want to keep it exactly the same. Just go around. It's gotten much wider than I want it to get, and so I'll just cut it into whatever arc I want to keep it, and then just scoop out from under it exactly. Oh, there's a metal piece there, and just scoop right under it. Okay, and again, this material could be used in a container. It can be used to fill in some spots where it got thinner during the winter time, whatever you want to do with it. But you do, I think, want to start out the season with it back under the, kind of back to the space where you want to keep it, or maybe even a little smaller than that. So you have some period of time you can let it grow without having to come back in again and push it back. We have a few epimedium, which are fantastic part shade or shade, non-aggressive ground covers that bloom very, very early in the spring season. Then they have beautiful foliage during the summertime. The clump does get a little bigger each year, but it's not aggressive like a lot of other things. What we want to do on these, and I got another one over there I'll show you as well, is get all of this material from last year cut back, because very, very soon that we're going to have flower spikes in them. And these are just kind of like hellebores, where if you get rid of the old foliage on them early, here's a hellebore back here. We had cleaned it up beforehand, and so none of the old foliage is around it, and now the flowers are showing off. The same thing with this epimedium. If I get in here and just with a very sharp pair of head shears, again I got a tulip coming up in the middle of it right here, so I am being cautious with my head shears. It might be that you need hand pruners to be a little bit more delicate, but that's all I need to do, and I can rake this off if I want to. But these flower spikes will now come up just like this hellebore is doing back here, and not have that old foliage around them. Look a lot better. Some Asiatic jasmine right here, and this is another super aggressive ground cover that I want to talk about. This one is more ivy-like or Vinca-like, which we're going to talk about as well. We planted it in this container. We had underplanted this holly that's in this container right here, okay, with it, and I'm going to give it a haircut right now. I don't ever want this touching the ground, because what will happen, and I just threw it on the ground, I'll make sure I clean it up over there, because what will happen is it'll hit the ground and it'll actually start running. So here's a spot of it, just neglected to get it cleaned up in time last year, and very, very quickly it's running across the ground and rooting in as it goes. So this is one I would be very cautious with, and again, I'm just going to give it a good inspection and make sure that I've gotten it all up, and I'm keeping it cut up here pretty high in this container, keeping it cleaned up so that I don't want this one on the ground. But if you do have it on the ground, this is one that's a candidate for being mowed. And this time of year in February, I want to cut it way, way, way back to where you want to keep it. And so you don't start the season off with it all up under everything, and just kind of, it just is maintenance all season long. It's the easiest time of year. The ground is soft, to be cleaning these things up, getting them and removing them. If it's something that's just been such a pest in the garden, you may just want to go get rid of it. Nice and cool outside. Ground is very workable. Easiest time of year to get rid of it. Here's an additional epimedium. This one has a little bit of green underneath it. Didn't get cold enough to knock this one all the way back. But again, I'm just going to go through here, clean it up. I can rake it out. we leave our leaves in place, and so the beds are a bit messier than they will look during the rest of the year. We're about to mulch, and so getting these things cleaned up, getting this material disposed of, thinning these leaves out in places where it's a little too thick, and then we'll mulch around these things, and it'll look very spiffy. There's some ajuga next to it, which, you know, is a shade ground cover, and here we are in the, you know, the late February, early or mid-February, and there don't, you know, it doesn't look like it will look the rest of the year, but we planted this here. It is now spread out to here. It's really, really loving this space. Is that bigger than I wanted? I don't know, but if it is bigger than you want it, you know, I'd go through here with the shovel and just take it back to a much smaller circle. Just cut around it with that flat shovel like I've already shown, scoop it out. You can fill in a middle spot that maybe died out on it with some of that material, but this is the time of year to get them back to where you want them for the growing season, because if it wakes up this far out, it will continue to, you know, it's going to take over area regardless, because that's the nature of a ground cover, right? But let's get them back to where we want to kind of keep control of them. So again, a lot of these ground covers can be very aggressive. Of course, English ivy is one of those that can just get absolutely out of control. If you've got it growing up trees, this is the time of year to go around the base of the trees and kind of cut it back. Be careful not to damage the tree. Kind of identify what the vining part is, you know, with the Vinca, and, you know, get them cut back, get them removed back from the tree just a bit. If you're keeping your ivy, we have a spot here between us and the neighbor that's kind of on the property line. They're pushing it this way and we're pushing it that way. Obviously, both of us want it gone, so I'm going to go through here with a shovel and just dig this out. You know, make sure I'm getting the roots out. I won't get it all in one shot. You know, there's just no way. This would be, don't talk about spraying on the channel a whole lot, but even if you have a big area of ivy that you're trying to get rid of, you know, you can mow it you can mow it on a high setting and then mow it on a slightly lower setting. And then, you know, the pieces that come back, you can paint some a herbicide or something on them. This is one of those projects that's so hard for some people just to get on, to even know where to start. You know, if you've got a large area of English ivy you're trying to get rid of. If you're like your English ivy and you're just trying to refresh it, this is the time of year you can take a pair of hedge shears and, you know, cut off some of the old foliage so that new fresh foliage is coming back. Pachysandra Vinca major would be another one that you can mow it. You can prune it with some hedge shears. You can take the shovel like I showed earlier and cut back, you know, the border of where you want to keep it. Again, it's going to try to get back out over that border, so you're going to have to do it a few times during the season. But again, no matter what it is you're trying to do, if you're trying to remove it, trying to get it cut off a tree, trying to refresh it for the season, whatever it is, here in February is the time, or March would be the time to be working on it. There's several things being used here as ground covers that we might not think of as traditional ground covers. There's a low-growing lantana right here called New Gold, and this would definitely be the time of year to be cutting it, you know, back. These only bloom on new growth during the growing season. They grow very rapidly. This one's very mature, so it'll cover this space again pretty quickly and bloom all summer long, but we'll just get it cut back right to the center. These are a bit woody, and you can choose, you know, on any of this material, you know, if it's diseased, spotted in some way, you know, examine these one piece at a time. If it was in bad shape, you want to dispose of the material on a compost pile that gets hot before you reuse it, or whatever way you want to dispose of it. If the plant was in good shape, like this lantana is, I could just go in here and cut this up, or run it through a machine, just a chipper of some kind, and just reuse it as mulch in the garden space. Another thing that can be used as ground cover would be something like a rosemary. This is Chef's Choice rosemary, which gets about this tall. There are ground cover or prostrate rosemaries that stay pretty much flat to the ground, and this would be the time of year to get in here. If there's any dead growth in the middle of them, if they're getting longer than you want them to get, they're coming out over a sidewalk, this will be the time of year to control them. Some people might be using these dwarfabilia as ground cover, which are great on a slope and, you know, are incredibly drought tolerant. Honestly, it'd be a great idea to use on a sloped area in a lot of sun. But again, they get kind of wild shoots on them here and there that could be cleaned up here in February, and then the width of them could be controlled. They bloom in the summertime, so this is the time of year to be pruning them. One ground cover that lots of people use are the ground cover junipers. This is all gold juniper, which is really a fantastic juniper. This is like similar to Blue Pacific. It's a shore juniper. Beautiful foliage year round. Really bright gold on the new growth. Any of these like Blue Rug, Blue Pacific, Procumbens Nana, this all gold, any of these ground cover junipers here in February, March is the time of year to be cutting them back. These really don't need a whole lot of pruning, but if I wanted to control them back off of the driveway, I would just go ahead and cut them right now. Again, I always recommend that you cut things a little further back than you actually want to keep them. And the reason for that is if I only cut it right to the concrete edge, then it has to kind of grow back out to look, to look good again. And so it's right back out there. So, but if I cut it a little further, then I can give it some time to grow and it'll look normal or nice before I have to cut it again. I actually like these out over the sidewalk a bit. I will go through here and clean up the leaves, just kind of in general clean them up. If there's any dead or dying material in it, you'd cut it out. And if they're going further, if they're coming down here in these other shrubs, these are pieces that I'll, come in here and cut off, this time of year, and just generally clean them up. Again, I like them buffered out here. I don't want them out here, but a little bit onto the sidewalk, just kind of softens that edge some. Junipers, definitely the time to get in there and clean those up. Be careful on junipers not to cut them back to the hard old wood in the middle. They don't rejuvenate from that very well. They're weirdly very good at taking care of themselves, but for whatever reason, they're tough ornamental plants, but for whatever reason, when I've cut them back and tried to really rejuvenate them and cut them all the way back to the very, very center and cut off all the foliage or any of the green growth on them, they've died or some portion of them have died, so be careful with that. I just pruned that back with my head shears, but I do have my pruners in my back pocket, and if you've got one dead limb, I would trace that all the way back into the center of the plant and cut that back, but not the general pruning them back. Another frequently used ground cover is Cotoneaster. These again can be pruned in the early spring to develop vigorous growth. But another one that I probably don't want to cut super hard back toward the middle of the plant. You can remove just a few of the oldest branches and then tip prune them a bit. They are susceptible to fire blight, so this is one where you want to use really clean tools, maybe even clean them in between different sections that you're pruning back. I was talking about Vinca and Pachysandra and ivy earlier. I failed to mention Euonymus coloratus, which is ground cover Euonymus, which can also get absolutely out of control. And this is the time of year to mow it off, clean it up, take it out, or at least get it back into some organized place. But I talked about the ivy climbing the trees, and here's an example. Here's a native southern magnolia, and just getting started here at the bottom of it. We've got some ivy creeping from a neighbor's garden back here, has creeped across and it's now trying to climb the tree. So we want to get in here, especially while this stuff is small, and get it cut down to the ground. But I don't cut it all the way to the ground. I'll cut it like this, and then that gives me the opportunity to come in here with a pair of gloves on and pull this piece. Okay, you see that? That's important that if you cut it all the way to the ground, it becomes much harder to pull it out. So I like to leave enough that I can at least give an effort to pull some roots out of the ground. Here's some variegated Vinca major, and you can see how it snuck through all of these shrubs from a neighboring property. This is the reason, this is the time of year while the ground is soft, and get in here and pull up these runners and get them back to where you want to keep them. Or, if it's an area you want to keep it, you can just cut them back and refresh them some. I put up another video recently on pruning back grasses and grass-like plants. And so this is definitely the time of year to be cutting back your grasses, or if you have some of your miscanthus and other things, if it's safe, you can burn them back, which some people do. But again, here in the city, it's, on very small lots, I'm not burning any of my dormant grasses back. But it's time of year to do those. This Carex, which is grass-like This is a plant we make a decision on. So it's being used as a ground cover here, but these are in terrific shape. And these are hardy in zone 5 to 9, typically up in zone 5. They die back pretty hard, and you would definitely be getting in there and cleaning them up. Here in zone 7, they can look rough depending on the winter. They looked a little rough at our house, and so we cut them back in that video. Here at a friend's house, they look fantastic, and I'm just gonna leave them be. Okay, I'm not gonna prune these back. And that would include also Liriope, sweet flag, Mondo grass, any of these kind of evergreen grasses or grass-like plants. You just kind of look at them, decide whether they need to be cut back, and then you can cut them back if you need to. Again, that's in that video. Another ground cover that we frequently use in shady spaces here in zone 7 is Prostrate plum yews. This is Utopia plum yew. This one actually gets about 3 feet in height or so and spreads outward like that. Rarely ever needs to be pruned. But the Prostrate plum yew, the one that grows pretty flat to the ground, it's been lots and lots of tour videos that I've done on the channel. It's such a great dry shade ground cover. It's evergreen. That one, this time of year, you can get, if it's grown outside of the bounds that you want to keep it, it's time to bring it back in. And again, on any of those things, I don't cut them right to where I want to keep them necessarily. I will cut them inside of that just a bit so that I can give them some time to grow again before I prune them back. This is some Liriope spicata, which is the kind of aggressive spreading type of Liriope. This is one you definitely want to try to keep in check if you do have it, or even honestly at the end of the day, get rid of, because some of these things can just be, I always think about when in gardening, if I have to spend a disproportionate amount of time on just one thing every year, and then I don't get to enjoy some of the things I really enjoy in the garden. So if something's taking up 50% of the gardening, whatever available time or energy you have during the year, that might be something to consider eliminating. Clumping Liriope, if you were using a Liriope, if this was clumping, it would just be cut back once a year, and it would just the clumps get slightly larger, but they don't spread aggressively into your other plants. So just recapping some of the reasons we would be cutting back some of these materials. In the case of this Liriope, it's got some leaf spot issues on it. It doesn't look great. And so we would get in here and cut this back, dispose of this material. Also, just from rejuvenating something that just doesn't look as fresh as it has in the past. And so, it's just gotten tired looking. It might be that you just have some dead limbs, some overgrown pieces in it. Some part of the plant is bigger than the other. That might be the case on a juniper, where you'd get in and take out an old piece of wood. It's climbing a tree, something like that. In the case of my St. John's wort at the house, I could actually just let that come back out. That gold foliage was eventually just cover it up, and it would probably look fine. But that new growth just looks so much better. And by cutting it where it branches, I'm gonna get 2 flowers or more. So I'm gonna increase the amount of flowering on it. So there's a lot of different reasons to rejuvenate these things. And then also, one of the main ones with some of these more aggressive ground covers is just, let's get them back to where we can manage them and they're not running all through our plants. So if there's a ground cover that we didn't mention in this, and there's a lot of other ground covers from, herbaceous perennial things, all kinds of things that can be aggressive or non-aggressive ground covers in the landscape. If you have a question about pruning one of them, ask it down below. And thanks for following along with the channel.